Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today for our discussion on Votes for Women, why the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment matters. I'm excited to be joined by a stellar panel today to help us mark this important occasion. Before I introduce them, a word about the Philanthropy Roundtable. I'm Debbie Gatte, the Roundtable's Vice President of Strategy and Innovation. The Roundtable supports and serves the largest network of donors committed to protecting philanthropic freedom, upholding donor intent, and strengthening our free society. We focus on philanthropic freedom and excellence and provide resources to help donors advance liberty, opportunity, and personal responsibility. So, advancing liberty, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. I mean, it's hard to believe that it was only 100 years ago that women in the US uniformly got the vote. And as we hear all of the noise about elections this year, it's important to remember that it took a real fight for women to gain this civil right. It's easy to take our right to vote for granted. Our panelists are here to share the story of the 19th Amendment, how it was not a linear process, but one filled with progress and setbacks, and the courageous women who took up this fight have left us with lessons that today's young people and freedom fighters can learn from. So I'm happy to introduce our lineup of experts who represent some of the most important organizations teaching American history and connecting its important lessons to today's issues. So Adrienne, I'm going to start with you. Adrienne, hi, welcome. Adrienne Whaley is an educator and history lover serving as the Director of K-12 Education and Community Engagement at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. Adrienne earned her bachelor's degree in African American Studies and her master's in education, and previously served as Curator of Education and Public Programming at the African American Museum in Philly. She has worked in both art and history museums and loves the potential for objects, artifacts, and primary source documents to enrich student learning experiences. Thanks for joining us, Adrienne.
Thank you for having me.
And next we have Jeffrey Rosen. Jeff is the president of, as you can see from behind him, the National Constitution Center. He's also a professor of law at the George Washington University Law School and a contributing editor to The Atlantic. Jeff is a graduate of Harvard College, Oxford University, and Yale Law School, the trifecta. He is the author of 6 books, including most recently Conversations with RBG, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on Life, Love, Liberty, and Law. His essays and commentaries have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, on National Public Radio, in the New Republic, where he was also the legal affairs editor, and in the New Yorker, where he's a staff writer. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thank you, Debbie.
And next we have David Bobb. David is with the Bill of Rights Institute, where he joined as president in 2013. And he has worked for 20 years to build strong civic education programs that engage the hearts and minds of young people. BRI is among nation's leading providers of free, open education resources and professional development programs for secondary school teachers in America on history and civics. Now, previously, David worked at the Hillsdale College for 12 years, where he created an online Constitution course, which is being accessed by millions of Americans. And he's the author of many books and publications and has a PhD in political science from Boston College. Thanks for being here, David.
Thank you, Debbie.
And finally, we have Tim Bailey. Tim is the Director of Education for the Gilder Layerman Institute of American History. He earned both his bachelor's and master's degree at the University of Utah. And prior to being at GLI, Tim taught 4th, 5th, and 8th grades in Salt Lake City. And he earned National History Teacher of the Year in 2009 and Utah State Teacher of the Year in 2001. He's authored the Easy Simulations book series for Scholastic Publications and contributed a number of books and articles concerning history and literacy education. He's been interviewed on education topics by Tom Brokaw and Brian Williams, among others, and has been quoted in many national publications. Thanks for joining us, Tim. And this is why I say we have some real experts with us today. So
Thanks, Debbie.
I'm going to ask you all to unmute your mics and we're going to have some one-on-one conversations with each of you, but before we do that, there is an initial question that I wanted to ask you. It's a question that was on my mind and that I know some of our viewers have been thinking about as well, based on some comments that we got back when we sent out the invitation for this webinar. So my question is there some irony in the fact that we have a panel with 3 men and 1 woman here to talk about the 100th anniversary of when women finally got the right to vote enshrined? And I thought we would start by asking that question and get your thoughts. Adrian, I'm gonna leave you last because we're gonna move. Let's hear from Tim, Jeff, and David first. So let's see, David, what are your thoughts on this question about our panel today?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to join you, and I look forward to this discussion. I think for the Bill of Rights Institute, our Director of Outreach would be here, but she is on maternity leave, having given birth to their firstborn, appropriately enough, on the 4th of July.
Oh.
So we've been led in this effort to create a curriculum by a group of scholars. They include people like Elizabeth Osborne, Johanna Newman, Barbara Berenson, Doris Weatherford. These are the people who really have been front and center in presenting this program to hundreds of teachers across the country. And I think it's appropriate that they really, as experts on this topic, are doing so. So, you know, there's a cause here that is really larger than this particular issue, and that's the cause of human rights. And I think it's something I've reflected often that Frederick Douglass was the only man who spoke at Seneca Falls. What did that feel like? What was his idea of agency and voice? And so I think it's really a great question. I think we're going to do our best today to address these things from the perspective of what can this mean for the young women, young men, our young citizens, young people out there today to think about constitutional change within sort of social change within a constitutional order.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, David. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I agree a lot with what David had to say, and thank you by the way for the invitation to speak and talk about what Gilder Layerman is up to in regards to the 19th Amendment and celebrating this 100th anniversary. I think that when we take a look at the slide deck that I'm going to show of what GLI has been up to when it comes to this anniversary, you'll see a lot of what David is talking about as well, in that what we're doing is representing women's points of view and voices through historians and through primary sources that relate to this struggle for women to gain the right to vote, to gain the franchise. And I think that our programming in many ways, through a lot of different avenues that we'll talk about later, are all guided by women scholars and by the scholarship that we went and sought those voices. And so although I, as a man sitting here on this panel, be assured that our work on the 19th Amendment was largely guided trying to get the point of view of what do women, as particularly historians, think when it comes to this topic, and let them guide the work that we did.
Got it. Thank you. Jeff, what are your thoughts on this question?
My thoughts on the question, Debbie, are you should have asked David, Tim, and me your question before forming the panel, because like my colleagues, there are many phenomenal women who worked on the initiatives I'm going to be talking about who are much better able to talk about it than I am. It's been so wonderful to work with these brilliant women on our exhibits team in creating the 19th Amendment exhibit, which is going to open next week to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment as a permanent addition to the NCC. I'm going to show you in a moment the interactive constitution where 2 great women legal scholars nominated by the Conservative Federalist Society and the Progressive American Constitution Society debate and discuss areas of agreement and disagreement about the 19th Amendment. And our amazing educational programs are run by Curry Sautner, and we're offering live classes on the Constitution throughout the upcoming season. You know, it is an important question. I think there is a value to having women talk about and celebrate the 19th Amendment in their own words. We're working now at the Constitution Center on a tribute to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and we're working with a team from Comcast NBC, and it was so inspiring that all women volunteered to work on this production because they wanted to pay tribute to Justice Ginsburg, and it's moving, and their passion for celebrating what she has done for women is inspiring. So let's move to Adrian as quickly as possible and hear as little from Tim and David and me as we can during this hour, because there are so many incredible women who can speak better than we can.
Thanks, Jeff. Adrian, what do
Yeah,
you think?
I think that this is an excellent question, and I think that it's one that every panel organizer should be asking themselves all of the time. It's so important to think about who are the voices that we're able to lift up and who are able to be experts in whatever the subject matter is that we're talking about. I agree in a lot of ways with what David and Tim and Jeff have had to say so far, and I think that the only thing that I can really add to this is that it's also important for us to recognize, and perhaps for me to just say out loud, that I'm also the only person of color who is a panelist on in this discussion, and thinking about the 19th Amendment and the ways in which there were challenges for women of color to be full participants in and to be included in the benefits of the passage of the 19th Amendment. I think it's absolutely critical to think about how we incorporate those voices as experts as well. And I think that probably all of us on this panel can agree that there is a larger conversation that both needs to happen and also is happening within the larger historic arts, culture, museum, historic site, et cetera, world, to think about how we are empowering people, how we are training people, how we are preparing both people and environments to make sure that, that folks of all backgrounds, that folks of diverse backgrounds are able to be lifted up into the sorts of positions where they are then able to appear in circumstances such as this.
There you have it. So it sounds like an opportunity for us to have additional conversations. Right. Okay. All right. So let's move to our topic, but I did want to talk about that up front because I thought it was a legitimate question that people were asking. So Adrian, I'm going to ask you to stay on, and Tim, Jeff, and David, if you could turn off your cameras, that would be great. And now while this is happening, here's some housekeeping tips. I mean, Adrian, do you want to go ahead and pull up your slides and start sharing
Get that started.
So here are some tips to how to possibly improve your view on Zoom, just so you can have some options on how to look at all of this. I think all of our speakers will have a visual. So at the top right, you will see a ... or you should, and there will be an option for you to select a side-by-side view, and that typically makes it easier to look at both people and visuals. And once you're there, you can, there's a bar in the middle, you can adjust the size of your slides versus the size of the speakers, and you can customize that for yourself. And we're only going to have the active speakers on, so hiding any non-video participants is an option as well. All right, so hopefully you have a great view of Adrian and her slides now, and we're going to get started. So Adrian, you're with the Museum of the American Revolution, which is a fairly new museum in Philadelphia. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So I'm hoping that I'm actually speaking to an art audience of folks who have already been to visit the museum. I hope that folks have already gotten the opportunity to meet some of my colleagues, to meet some of our wonderful educators, and so on and so forth. We are an extremely new organization. We are a baby in the world of museums. We just opened in April of 2017, so we only recently celebrated our 3rd anniversary. In some way, shape, or form, this museum has actually existed as a collecting institution for about a century, but we didn't become a space that people could visit until 3 years ago. And for those of you who haven't been, we're located at the intersection of 3rd and Chestnut Streets in downtown Philadelphia in the historic area. So we're actually just a couple of blocks away from the National Constitution Center, from Carpenter's Hall, from Pennsylvania, the old Pennsylvania State House, which is now Independence Hall, and all of these wonderful sites that make up sort of like the central places you want to visit if you're going to do the old Philadelphia experience.
Definitely worth visiting.
Yes, yes. And we love being a part of this community. It's so wonderful to get to interact with all of these other history lovers to build the story of how our nation came to be. And so, in fact, what do we do? So we view our mission as being to uncover and share compelling stories about the diverse people and complex events that sparked America's ongoing experiment with liberty, equality, and self-government. We do that in a bunch of different ways. So what you can see here is one of our immersive environments that features a replica of a Liberty tree, as well as set inside of that, you can see a real slice of an actual Liberty tree that was located in Annapolis, Maryland, until a hurricane knocked it down only about a decade ago. In addition to the immersive environments, we have digital interactives to help people dig really deeply into images and primary source documents. We allow people to interact with both real and replica artifacts. You can see folks at our tent cart interacting with replica artifacts that relate to the real George Washington's tent that we have on display, as well as some kids playing in our Revolution Place sort of hands-on family center. We run student programs. We have welcomed approximately 70,000 students over the course of each school year since we opened. That totals around 75,000 or 175,000 so far. We also do teacher professional development workshops, like you can see right here. We did a week-long Summer Teacher Institute last year on the Declaration of Independence. This year, we turned that into a virtual experience and talked about experiences of people of African descent during the Revolutionary era. We do family programs. We do lots of experiences where folks are in a costumed interpretation and they're interacting with guests. We actually run a citizenship class and we host naturalization ceremonies. We're keeping ourselves pretty busy. So that's a short version of what we're up to. Of course, given this virtual world that we are now in, we've shifted a lot of our materials, our programs, and our resources into the virtual space. And so that's how a lot of people are connecting with us right now.
Mm-hmm. And you actually do have an amazing virtual tour of the museum itself.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a great opportunity for folks to come see our galleries without actually coming to see our galleries.
That's right. That's right. So let's turn to the 19th Amendment. What is the museum doing to celebrate this anniversary?
I'm probably going to geek out over this, so please forgive me. So people might wonder, what does the Museum of the American Revolution, a squarely 18th century institution, have to say when it comes to the 19th Amendment, which is a story that is very much about the 19th into the 20th centuries? But it turns out actually a lot. So there is this amazing moment within the Revolutionary era from 1776 to 1807 when women in New Jersey actually had the ability to vote. And in fact, it wasn't just women, it was also free people of African descent. All you had to do was prove that you had a certain amount of money and you were eligible to vote at the local, state, and federal levels. It's this amazing story, but it's an interesting tale, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But many of us have probably heard stories about women who were engaged in supporting the revolutionary cause. We've probably heard of people like Molly Pitcher. We may have heard of the writings of somebody like Mercy Otis Warren or Hannah Griffiths. You hear about women who are actively producing cartridges and all sorts of things for the military effort. And you've probably heard of this famous letter by Abigail Adams where she's writing to her husband, John, and she tells him that in the new code of laws, which it will be necessary for you to make, I desire that you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. And it's sort of this early, like, proto-feminist moment where she is saying, remember that you need to treat us okay in this moment where you're thinking about equality and liberty and self-government and justice and all of these things. Now, John laughs about it when he writes back to her and essentially calls her saucy, which she does not appreciate. But what you see is that there are some people who are actually taking this much more seriously than John Adams is. And in fact, in the state of New Jersey in 1776, when all of the states are writing their new constitutions, what New Jersey says is all inhabitants may vote. They don't say all men, they don't say all white men, they say all inhabitants. And it's fascinating because you could say, oh, well, they were writing this document really quickly and it was an oversight and, you know, that wasn't on purpose, except that in 1790, when they're extending their laws, they say he or she to refer to voters. So they very purposefully include women in this story. And then again in 1797, they include this revolutionary he or she. And so that is what our exhibit is talking about. Now, historians have known that this is a thing that existed. They knew that there was some word that women were voting, et cetera, but they didn't know all of the details. So what's super, super cool is that the museum actually did a bunch of original research. And what they found was 18 individual poll lists that list the names of people voting in townships and counties all across the state of New Jersey. And from those 18 poll lists, they found 9 poll lists that had the names of women on them. Over 160 women voting over 200 times in the span of about a decade. And so what you can see on the right-hand side of the screen is not an original document. We did not highlight the original document, but you can see the names of these women who have gone to the polls and they voted. And what you can see here is that they're actually going in clusters. And it seems to be that they're going as family groups, a mother and maybe her daughters, maybe a woman and her sisters. Sometimes it's groupings who attended church together, but it's this amazing body of evidence to show the political activism of women who are determined to have a say in their world. And so what we're doing is we're telling this story through primary sources like that, but also through many different kinds of artifacts. So on the left here, you can actually see the gown that it is said that Deborah Sampson got married in. And I think we all know the story of Deborah Sampson as being the woman who pretended to be a man so that she could fight in the Revolutionary War. And so you've got this version of her as sort of being very masculine, and yet here she's being presented as very feminine. And so how is she holding these different spaces as a woman who's being active in supporting her beliefs and supporting the revolutionary cause? We have things like an actual ballot box, which is what you see on the right-hand side. This is an original ballot box from the early 19th century that women would have dropped their ballots into, which is just an amazing piece of material culture. So those are the sorts of stories that we're going to be exploring through this exhibit.
It's incredible.
I'll just tell you really quickly, but we're going to build a whole bunch of resources around this. So we're developing an interactive website so that people can actually explore those poll lists, whether you're in our museum or outside of it. You can learn the stories of the different women who were voting. You can learn the significance of the elections they were voting in. And then we're building a whole suite of programs for families and students and teachers, adult audiences, members, all sorts of things like that. So we're really looking forward to this.
Wow. Yeah, I wonder how many people know about the New Jersey story, if this is something that you as historians are just researching more deeply now and learning the details about. So this is really incredible. I have one quick last question for you. So obviously the path was not straight forward to the right to vote for women. They in some places had it and then lost it. So when you're talking to students, how do you talk to them about the gains and losses along the way? And what does this tell us about the path to gaining civil rights? And I do need to move on to Tim soon, but I would love to hear the answer to that question.
Yes, absolutely. So that is an excellent question, right? Because we want to believe, and I think it's Martin Luther King Jr. who said this, that the arc of the universe bends towards justice. But I think that what we actually find is that it's very much a zigzag path. Right? They're often 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and maybe it slowly and surely is working in that direction, but there are certainly challenges along the way. And so what you find in New Jersey is that over the course of several contested elections, and as women get more and more involved in the electorate, there start to be concerns about whether women are overstepping their bounds, if they're stepping outside of their place. And you see those fears start to increase as women begin to be sort of the swing votes in elections in the state of New Jersey. And so you start to see them being called out as things like petticoat electors. You start to see them being denigrated in the press, and all sorts of things are being said about them, to the point where in 1807, a vote is taken at the state legislature, and all of the representatives unanimously agree to remove the vote, both from women and from free people of African descent. And you see that sort of action and that sort of belief in the role of women being celebrated in something like this poem here. Although reinforced by the petticoat band, true Republican valor they could not withstand. And of their disasters in triumph we'll sing, for the petticoat faction's a dangerous thing.
Wow. Oh, dangerous things.
Oh, yes. Okay. Pretty powerful.
Pretty powerful. Thank you, Adrienne. I really appreciated that. So I'm going to ask you to turn your camera off. And I lied. I said Tim, but I lied. I'm going to invite Jeff to join me next. And while Jeff is joining me, I want to remind everyone that there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And if you have questions that are coming to mind that you would like to ask our panelists, I encourage you to start putting them in there now so that we can ask them during our Q&A. But here's Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi. So you are clearly in front of the National Constitution Center. I suspect you're not literally in front of it today. But tell us a little bit about the National Constitution Center. It's not that far down the road from the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia.
That's right. I live in front of this fake backdrop. I'm not there right now, but I'm thrilled that the Constitution Center is open to the public. And we just started admitting people last week. 500 people showed up over the weekend. We have free admission all weekend. And we're right on Independence Mall, across from Independence Hall, with the most inspiring constitutional views in America. So friends, imagine me, I'm staring out in front of the center, looking at Independence Hall inside this beautiful building, the Museum of We the People, which has the rarest copies of the Constitution, the very first drafts written by James Wilson, rare copies of the Declaration of Independence, this wonderful new gallery on the Civil War and Reconstruction, which has the Emancipation Proclamation and tells the story of African-American equality after the Civil War. And I'm so excited that next week, on August 26th, the actual 100th anniversary of ratification of the amendment, we're going to open a new permanent gallery on the how women won the vote and the 19th Amendment. And it's full of meaningful artifacts, including Pennsylvania's ratification copy of the 19th Amendment itself. We tell the story that Adrian told so well of the last minute change of vote by that representative from Tennessee who got a letter from his mother telling him to vote for the amendment and cast a tie-breaking vote, as well as thrilling interactives rooted on our interactive Constitution. And that's what I'm really eager to show our friends, Debbie, because that's the core of our learning efforts. And I think, is this a good time to try to screen?
It is. So I'd love to hear how you're going to share the story of the 19th Amendment with students. So the exhibit sounds like it's one way physically in the building, but tell us, how are you going to share the story with students all across the country?
Well, we'll do it on the same amazing online platform that we share all of our content on, and that is called the Interactive Constitution. And I'm so excited.
Please share it. I'd love to see it. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so here we go. It is, let's take a look. Here's the Interactive Constitution. So this amazing online platform has gotten 30 million hits since it launched in 2015 with a very generous grant from the John Templeton Foundation, which provided the seed funding for it. And thanks to interest in the Constitution Center, learning about the Constitution since COVID, and the live online classes that my colleagues and I started launching since COVID, we're now the 4th most visited museum website in America and the 7th most visited in the world. And that's just because people are so hungry for nonpartisan, accurate information about the Constitution that tells these stories in a historically rooted way. So let's click on the 19th Amendment and see what we can learn.
Let's see.
Okay. What is so wonderful about the core content of this online platform is that with the help of the Federalist Society, which is the leading conservative legal organization, and the American Constitution Society, the leading progressive organization, we've assembled liberal and conservative scholars to write about every clause of the Constitution, describing what they agree about and what they disagree about. So this 1,000-word statement that Gail, Harriet, and Nancy Gertner wrote together is like a unanimous Supreme Court opinion. Every word in here has been agreed to by both sides, and you can confidently cite it in a nonpartisan way. So here we go. We tell the story of that New Jersey Constitution, which provided that all inhabitants could vote. And we talk about the clarification from the 1790 election law, and then the 1807 change, which was rooted by allegations that men dressed as women had been going to the polls, and then the rise of property qualifications, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton's Seneca Falls resolution, and the effort by states even before the 19th Amendment to begin to recognize the right to vote. And here's the entire history in just an incredibly concise 1,000-word essay. It is remarkable. Debbie, I hadn't read it before the webinar, I had to refresh myself, and I'm just impressed, as I always am every time I log on to this, by the fact that it has it all, including the last minute story of Tennessee's change in vote, this nail biter with a decisive vote cast by Harriet Byrne. And then
Now,
our
if you were pulling that up, I'm actually not able to see it, Jeff. I just wanted to flag that for you.
oh, you should have, I got so excited that I started to talk before.
I think you're telling us about it, and we're
Well, let's try again then, shall we?
yes. Thank you.
And then you'll see all the wonderful things that I just did. Okay, here we go. But what I'm going to continue as I talk to say that the essays say that the individually authored essays are supposed to point to areas of disagreement, but in this case, both scholars agree that there is tremendous agreement. Here, did you get it now?
Yes, there we go.
Okay, so here's the interactive constitution, and I'm just going to the
Here we go.
19th
Yes.
Amendment. Sorry to have been.
The suspense was killing me. I wanted to.
I know. I just read it. I was just reading from this essay, but it's all in this incredibly impactful 1,000-word statement, which concludes by saying that after telling the story of Tennessee, the individually authored essays are supposed to point to disagreements in interpretation, but perhaps the most remarkable thing about the 19th Amendment is how relatively non-controversial it's been. Nevertheless, as for each of the provisions of the Constitution, we have concurring opinions by our conservative and liberal scholars. So here, our conservative scholar responds to a claim by Reva Siegel of Yale Law School, who says that the 19th Amendment modified the 14th Amendment, and in light of the 19th Amendment, we should read the 14th Amendment to strike down issues of unconscious bias, sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and other things that the court has not yet read it in all circumstances to cover. And Nancy Gertner disagrees with Gal Harriet and says that she, like Reva Siegel, thinks that the 19th Amendment did change our meaning of the 14th. So that's just a wonderful way to introduce an important constitutional disagreement in respectful terms. And this confirms that by separating our political from our constitutional views, we can have civil debates about the contested meanings of these provisions without in any way descending into partisan politics. So that's the core of what the 19th Amendment explainers offer. But that's not all.
That's not all. What else do you have?
Always has more. So we have for each provision of the Constitution a media library that collects the podcasts, blog posts, and town hall videos and educational videos pegged to the relevant amendments. So we just last week did a wonderful podcast with historians Martha Jones and Lisa Tatro about the relationship between African-American women and the passage of the 19th Amendment. We had a great town hall video on the right to vote. Each week I host these podcasts which convene liberal and conservative scholars. These are getting 100,000 listeners a week because of the hunger for nonpartisan constitutional information, and they're all pegged here on the media library. And then we have these educational videos. I told you about these classes that Curry Sautner and I have been offering. They're all archived, and we'll pick them up again live in the at the end of August. Friends who are watching, I'd love your help in distributing these online classes. And in fact, I will go to the, here's our homepage, and you'll see here what the classes are. They include a full schedule for the entire upcoming school year, week by week, for middle, high school, and college students, every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 12, 1, and 2 p.m. And look at the range of topics that we're going to be covering. Federalism, the Electoral College. On September 17th, our honorary chair, Justice Gorsuch, is going to join us for a special Q&A with students across America. The presidency, voting rights, the battle of the branches, the Bill of Rights, slavery in America, the battle for equality, how Congress works, the foundations of American democracy. That's just through December. And then we start again in the spring with more topics like the civil rights movement, the amendment process, deep dives into each of the 4 freedoms of the First Amendment, the religion clauses, assembly and petition, as well as the 4th Amendment. Here's a special 19th Amendment session, and more. I have to tell you how meaningful it was to reach 30,000 students in the spring. The Q&A in the Zoom chats were engaged. The feedback and evaluations were high. And we have such an opportunity now that everyone is learning at home to offer this amazing free online resource. We're especially eager to reach underserved communities. So your help in distributing either to individual school districts or to networks like the charter schools network that we're working with both in Philadelphia and around the country, or the College Board, which is sending out these links to advanced placement students, or to individual school districts like Dr. Height in Philadelphia, who is encouraging his students to sign up, would be great. We've got to act fast because this remote learning crisis is so urgent, and it would be great to get your help in pushing the classes out. There's just one last feature that I want to show you, and that's the drafting table. Now, for the 19th Amendment, our drafting table provision is going to launch next week, so I can't show you that. But let's look at the 14th Amendment. For every clause of the Constitution, we show early drafts of the amendment that allow people to explore in a nonpartisan way how the language evolved. And it's a very inspiring and interesting story, including when we look to the Equal Protection Clause, we see that there's this bundled amendment proposed by the Joint Committee on Reconstruction in 1866 that would have covered the right to vote. Debbie, I was so excited to learn this because, you know, the 14th Amendment, as it passed, did not cover the right to vote. It only granted equal protection for civil rights, not political and social rights. And it took the 15th Amendment to cover the right to vote. But this amendment, proposed on April 20th, would have included, from after July 4th, 1876, no discrimination shall be made in the right of suffrage because of race. And had that passed, of course, the right to vote would have been secured much sooner. So the drafting table is an amazing tool. It's all, I feel, I talked about my amazing colleagues who have worked together on all these initiatives. All of us feel that this interactive Constitution platform, free and available to all at constitutioncenter.org, is the most meaningful educational initiative that any of us has ever been involved in. It's so content rich, it's entirely nonpartisan, and working with you and your colleagues and all of our great Philanthropy Roundtable friends, just to spread the word and to offer this free resource to school districts, students, and learners of all ages around the country is so meaningful and inspiring.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff. This is the fun part about the drafting table is you find all these hidden things where there's a foreshadowing of the amendments to come, and it is fascinating. So, Jeff, I'm going to ask you to turn off your camera so I can talk with Tim. And Tim is joining us, and I think Tim is going to share his screen as well. I'm going to remind everyone about the Q&A box at the bottom where you can share your questions with us. So Tim, tell us a little bit about Gilder Layerman.
So the Gilder Layerman Institute of American History, we've been around for, this is our 26th year. We had our 25-year celebration last year. We recently mourned the passing of one of our founders, Richard Gilder, passed away just a couple of months ago. But we are powering on. The Institute has many outreaches in school districts and schools throughout the country. Probably our largest direct reach to teachers and to students is through our affiliate school program, which began with a matching grant from the NEH about 5 years ago, which asked us to establish a relationship with 3,000 schools where we would have direct contact with those schools and the teachers at those schools, providing materials and content and support. We've just passed 27,000 schools. And so that initiative gives us direct access to schools and students. And just as importantly, every month when we send out materials and posters and offerings for books and so on, the other thing we ask is that here's something great for you, give us something great for us, which is your feedback. Tell us what you need in your classrooms. Tell us what your students are looking for. Tell us what's important to you. Tell us the best ways for us to help you with what you do. And that back and forth monthly is incredibly valuable with us keeping our finger on the pulse of what's going on in American history education and the civic world. Yeah, it's great.
There's a lot of resources on the Gilder Layerman Institute website, so I encourage people to go there. But let's talk about the 19th Amendment, because I know that this is a big focus for you all this year. What are you doing? What are you doing to celebrate that and to teach that content?
So right now, with our mission, just to let everybody know, this has guided the Institute now for 25 years, is to promote the knowledge and understanding of American history through educational programs and resources to foster informed civic engagement. And that to us is the guiding star for all of us. So how do we do that? Well, there are, and this is directly talking about particularly the 19th Amendment and what we've been doing in promoting the women's suffrage and this anniversary. We do that through primary sources, through our online master's degree program, our self-paced courses, and a new program that we piloted last year that we'll talk more about called Teaching Civics Through History. So primary sources, what started the Institute was Richard Gilder and Louis Layerman, two friends who had a passion for American history, began collecting as enthusiasts, history enthusiasts. And over the years, they collected, we now have in a collection over 70,000 documents. Before they gifted it to the Institute as a nonprofit, it was the largest privately held collection of American history documents in the world. It's that collection that grounds a lot of our work. And even if we're not using pieces in our collection, even if we're using pieces from somebody else's, because we may not have it, maybe we use something from Library of Congress or something, that is still the guiding light, that primary sources are how we teach. So for instance, this is just one that we have in our collection. This actually comes from it's got an interesting story behind it. In 1910, as many, I mean, as all, I would guess most people know, the West and the East had a different view when it came to women's suffrage in the late 19th and early 20th century. And Western states gave women the vote very early on. Utah gave women the vote in 1870. Now, Wyoming actually beat them in giving women the vote, but I got to say for my home state, Utah, that we actually got women to vote first because we had an election before Wyoming did. Even though technically they gave them the vote first, women in Utah voted before they did. Anyway, so this poster here, this comes from Washington State and the campaign there to get women to vote. And so the people that were pushing for it produced this poster, and it says, Lincoln said, women should vote. And then there's a little quote there from Lincoln. So this actually, there's some evidence that this helped push over the line, because only, of course, men were voting for women to vote, which is the irony here, but yes, but they did. And so in Washington, the men that voted to have women join the vote. And there's thinking that this influenced it. Well, the interesting thing is Lincoln said this, but he said it as a joke. Abraham Lincoln was not a proponent of women's suffrage. There's no evidence that I know of that he was a proponent of women's suffrage. There's a quote he said, but it was in jest, but they pulled that right out of context in order to make this poster to push their point. But anyway, primary sources.
It worked, and it worked.
And it worked, absolutely. So primary sources is what we use as our guiding light, as I said. So sharing primary sources with teachers and families, we do now, as has already been pointed out by my colleagues, that's been how, we've had to make this shift. We live in a new world. And so producing new digital programming, we pivoted very quickly. So we have a program that was actually in person in our vault in New York, where we would have, we would pull actual primary sources out of the vault. Christopher Columbus's letter to Ferdinand and Isabella from 1492, and that let people actually see that real document. Instead, now we're doing it virtually, which on the one hand, when we would do it at the vault, you could have like 30, 40 people. Now doing it virtually, we have over 1,000 show up on to come see what's in the vault. Book breaks, we have every Sunday. We have discussions with history scholars about their books and answer questions from the audience. This month, because of the anniversary, we're having all women historian scholars. And so this coming Sunday, Professor Martha Jones is going to be discussing her book, Vanguard, How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All. That's been a very popular new program for us. Online History School, this is meant for students. We've had programs that are elementary students, for students, where we've had actors from Hamilton the musical, that, we produced the Hamilton education program. Well, we still have a close tie with them, even though the musical's not running now. But we have those actors have come on and read picture books to elementary students, all based on American history. That's been a terrific program. And then we also have programs for middle school students, high school students. We've been doing this summer. It's just been great.
So Tim, let me ask you, we're in an election year this year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How are you connecting all of this material about the 19th Amendment to the fact that there is an election and people will be voting this year?
Yeah, well, several ways. The one thing is that we're focusing, we took that into account when we planned our schedule for our online master's degree courses this semester. This upcoming course for the fall is The Fight for Women's Right, 1820 to 1920, by Professor Catherine Clinton. And we also, as we'll get to when we're talking about our program, our TCTH, Teaching Civics Through History program, that also we're putting in place before the election, so that teachers are going to have materials that they can use with students to bring them into the more education, not only about the 19th Amendment, but about the election in general. And specifically, one of the things we're focusing on is the Electoral College. I mean, the Electoral College is this mystery box for so many people, not just students, but adults. You plug in all these votes and they go into this black box somewhere, and then ding, out comes this Electoral College number. What did that have to do with the popular vote? And then we have the president. So how does that work? And what was the process behind it? Why do we have it? Could it change? What would it take to change it? What are the arguments for changing it? And so that kind of education that we provide teachers, so then they can provide it to their students.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. We're going to, did you have some, oh, look, you have
so we got self-paced courses. This is something else that the general public can do this, and educators. And then, of course, our Teaching Civics Through History program that I was discussing. That was piloted last year in Boston, LA, San Francisco, and Fresno. And then, of course, as I said, we've got women's suffrage that we're taking on, and how we elect a president, the Electoral College. And that's a program that ties the past to the present. So it's taking current events and hooking it to the foundations of where is this issue coming from. So when you talk about the current election, what we do is we discuss who chose who gets to vote. And in this election, you just can't take your vote for granted. It came from somewhere, and to teach students where that comes from and why it is so precious.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
No, that's right. That's right. So, and I have to sign up for your book talk on Sunday. That sounded fascinating. All right, Tim, I'm going to ask you to turn your camera off and invite David to join and to share his screen. These transitions are fun. All right, David, as you're pulling that up, the Bill of Rights Institute, tell us a little bit about that. We get all these different organizations. What does yours do?
The Bill of Rights Institute was started 2 decades ago. We have a network of teachers that now is 54,000 strong that use our online curricula, all of which is made available to them free of charge. They participate in professional learning programs. In the last couple of years, we've been featuring the 19th Amendment in those professional learning programs. Teachers earn thousands of hours of continuing education through those. And we also do programs directly to young people. So it's a variety of things that are all focused around civics and history education.
Excellent. All right. So I know you're doing a lot on the 19th Amendment, including a special box for teachers that has a number of materials in it. Could you tell us a little bit about the special effort around the 19th Amendment and why you're investing so much time into it?
Yes, if you think about really the framework by which Seneca Falls made that Declaration of Sentiments, they're hearkening back to the Declaration of Independence. Last month in July, the Bill of Rights Institute debuted our largest resource to date, and it bears the title, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, A History of the American Experiment. What's it an experiment in? I think the 19th Amendment really illustrates that it was an experiment in self-government under the rule of law. And that experiment had, as Adrian mentioned at the top of our conversation today, zigs and zags. That wish that Abigail Adams and so many others of the 18th century expressed took a long time. It was a story of struggle and sacrifice, and it was hard won. I think that's something that we can celebrate at this time and appreciate, but we also want young people to understand that they didn't know the outcome. They didn't know that it was going to succeed when they were struggling and when they were giving up so much. We now have the benefit of that, and it's only been 100 years, right? So as a whole, BRI takes a look at those questions with inquiry. And this resource that we published last month treats all of American history. It has those different components that you can see there on the screen, more than 190 essays and narratives, 72 lessons, 30 point counterpoints, 150 primary source documents, and 37 decision points. We partnered with an organization called OpenStax out of Rice University. They've saved college kids $1 billion in textbook costs. And BRI, thanks to the support of philanthropists, has made this resource, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, available to teachers all around the country for free. It features really the work of 96 scholars. 2 of them have won Pulitzer Prizes. And what we ask them to do is really write in language that is easy to access if you're a 17-year-old. Don't use jargon. Treat those topics in a way that reflects the contingency of history. And so this kind of resource gives you the broader framework by which BRI approaches our work then on the 19th Amendment. So last year in 2019, we published this curricular resource called Votes for Women, the Story of the 19th Amendment. And you're right, Debbie, we had a box. We had a lot of fun putting together a ballot box. And the idea is pre-COVID, we sent this out full of materials, including a tea towel, posters, things that gave students a kind of tactile way to understand that struggle. And the whole idea here, around which we've built a bunch of teacher seminars, 650 teachers participated in 18 seminars shortly after the publication of this BRI classroom kit. In the fall, we'll do 9 more, many of them as webinars. And they were all organized around this theme. How does one carry out the long-term change in order to better align institutions with principles of liberty, justice, and equality within a constitutional order? And so this topic of the 19th Amendment is vital to learn for the thing in itself. But it also reveals something that's really fascinating, which is how do you put into change those ideals when they're not realized, but they're incipient in the promise of the Declaration? And I think that's a question for our moment. And it's one that young people have really gravitated towards, because at the heart of this curriculum, which is available at mybri.org, anybody can download it, teachers can implement it, is this idea that you ought to learn these things and then act. And I'd like to read one quotation, because I think, when you look at what are the lessons that we can take away from this, this centennial celebration, Carrie Chapman Catt said this: "Women have suffered agony of soul which you can never comprehend, that you and your daughters might inherit political freedom. That vote has been costly. Prize it." And then shortly thereafter, she says this line: "Progress is calling to you to make no pause. Act." And so if you think of a message that could be given to young people, first you have to learn, and that takes a long time. But then you might think about acting. And so that's what BRI did in structuring this resource around this question, and really a 9-part series of things that would allow students to really understand at a very basic level, here's how you can act. Thinking about these principles, what the Declaration entails, here's how you can jump in and do something in your own life, in your own community, and seek to solve problems.
David, I'm fascinated by that last part, because it's you're making available the lessons of history for today's context. And as you said, we are having one of those moments right now where there are a lot of people looking for social change. What are some of the kinds of elements that you've incorporated in the curriculum? Could you give us an example or two of the kinds of questions, either questions or kinds of activities you're doing with students that help bring that out?
I think the first thing is to try to understand what are the institutions by which we can make social change. And so there's government, there's charity, and there's entrepreneurship or the business sector. Mm-hmm. And too often I think we have given students an idea that these things are in their hermetically sealed areas and that it's mainly through government action that this happens. And so we looked at in the curriculum some of the ways in which the cultural appreciation and accretion of that angst, right, that Abby Adams and Mercy Otis Warren and so many in the 18th century expressed. How did that manifest itself before it could ever become something like a civil right? And that points you back to a reflection on human nature. So, you know, when you're first thinking about something and you're 16 or 17 years old, the first thing you have to do is define the problem. Work really hard to define it. The second thing that you might do is to set a goal and then to pursue education. And so we go through these kind of things, and what we're trying to do is for young people, very often they're met with these things that are so cosmic and so almost overwhelming, right? Their idealism pushes them to want to change the world, but the reality around them says this is very, very difficult. We don't want to quash that idealism, right? We want them to understand that they can make a difference. And so the idea then is define a problem in your local community, but then understand what these institutional apparatuses are and their strengths and weaknesses. How would you go about creating the conditions in which, by which an amendment process might actually work? Because one of the reasons it took so long is that the political ferment wasn't there, right? It just wasn't. And previous efforts to try to generate that political effort were not there. And so you see a kind of, I think, righteous impatience. And there's a lot of that kind of righteous impatience that's out there now among young people. And I think what we want to impress upon them is that it's good to think about that. It's good to reflect on that. It's good to act on that. But think about how we can uphold the Constitution, our formal document, by matching it up with the informal Constitution, the way that the way that civil society operates.
Thank you, David. So I think that was a great note to end this conversation on. I've been monitoring the Q&A box and have seen that most of our questions have actually been answered, but there is one that has not been answered. So I'm going to ask everybody to come back on screen, and David, to have you stop sharing your screen. And the one question that I don't think was answered yet is about teaching this content to younger kids, upper elementary or middle school. And what guiding question do you think this younger student audience would find the most fun to use? And I'm going to make it a rapid round, and I'll start with Adrian and have you go around. Like, what is the one question you think for younger students would be a good guiding principle?
Is voting a right or a privilege?
Fascinating. Okay, all right. Jeff?
Any advocates of the 19th Amendment also supported an Equal Rights Amendment that would have forbade gender discrimination across the board. Would you vote for the ERA or not?
Uh-huh. All right. Tim?
Yeah, for elementary students and even into middle school students, the biggest issue they have is presentism. They can't get themselves out of the present and put themselves back in somebody else's shoes. And so I would ask them, what would be arguments for not having women voting? Can you think of reasons why people wouldn't have wanted them to vote, to try to get them to step back a little bit?
Ooh, interesting. And David?
I think along those same lines of presentism, be honest with yourself, put yourself back in the time. Having done a little bit of study, do you think that you would have supported the ratification? Why or why not?
All right. Some fascinating questions. I want to take that class. All right. So thank you all for joining us. I see the rest of the questions were answered. There is a survey that we put up in the chat in case people have a moment to answer that. that survey information helps us really figure out what content to present so that we can be most helpful to all of you. And congratulations to, you know, all of us on this important anniversary of the 19th Amendment. It's a good reminder about how hard fought some of these battles are and how precious those rights are once we are able to attain them. So thank you to our great panel for sharing that story with us, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye.